Well, welcome to another episode of the Reintroduction Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Stefanos, and I'm here with my co-host, Mina Sawiris, and we have some fantastic guests with us this evening, and we're so excited to have you, Aida and Maria, on the podcast this evening. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
This is okay. I know this gets pretty old, okay? Every episode we get on and we say we've got fantastic guests. We've got some awesome guests. I know. But hear me out for a second, okay? Because today we're talking about something that might seem dissociated from your life, but I'll tell you that once we're done talking here, I hope that we can at least be able to reflect and see how close to home this is. But because this is such an important topic, we have two very special people here. And Chris and I have known Aida and Maria for a very long time. But this isn't just about friendship. We're not just having two of our friends here. I want to introduce them. I'll introduce them together because the work that they both do is very close to God's heart and very close to each other. Maria has been working with International Relief, her and Aida, for a very long time. Though they work for different organizations, Aida has started and founded Take Heart Foundation, which mainly serves in countries like Iraq and other parts of the Middle East, also serves in Egypt and parts of Africa. The Take Heart mission has really been about supporting emotionally, spiritually, and financially a lot of communities and organizations in need on the ground. And Aida pretty much just got back from a multi-country trip just a couple of days ago. So we're very happy and thankful that she was able to make the time to be with us here today. She started her mission in Africa, in Kenya, which is a place near and dear to many of us, with her wonderful husband, Father Musa, where they served for many years. How long, Aida, were you in Kenya for? Is it 11 years?
I was there for 12 years.
12 years. Amazing.
Yeah.
And then Maria here, on the other hand, is no different. She's worked in international relief for many, many years. She lived in the Middle East. She worked as a director of a Christian relief organization. She worked with Yazidis, Iraqis, Armenians, Assyrians, Kurds, and so many other communities to help rebuild after so much annihilation and breakdown in these communities. So there is no one more fit to have this conversation with today besides Aida and Maria. So we're so happy that you guys are here with us today. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I want to start us off by an interesting story that I heard years ago, and it always it's always in the back of my mind, and it's very relevant today. That in World War I in 1914, on Christmas Eve, in one of the regions where Britain and Germany were fighting, on Christmas Eve, the British soldiers heard the German soldiers sitting in the trenches, and they started to sing and do some Christmas caroling, and the British soon joined. And the next morning, there was a truce where the German soldiers and the British soldiers both walked out of their trenches. They exchanged brief Christmas greetings. They exchanged some gifts. They buried their casualties. And the next day, they went back to war, killing each other. And this story honestly breaks my heart because it shows you that deep down, the conflict has nothing to do with human beings. And people are longing for truce. Yet, there's so much breakdown and there's so many outside forces that dictate that something else happens otherwise. There's a journalist, and his name is Norman Angels. He wrote a book called The Great Illusion. And in the book, he talks a lot about how the aggressor and the person initiating the conflict loses always as much as the victim, if not even more. Even if the war is about money, if the war is about looting, the aggressor always loses. So why do you guys think we still go to war? It has been since the existence of man has been on earth. Why do we keep going back to war? Why do we always go back to conflict? Maria, what do you think?
Well, I think, I guess when you were asking me this question, I was trying to go back to the origins and seeing kind of where it came from. And I guess I went back to the very beginning to Adam and Eve, and then their next generation of Cain and Abel. Because it's as soon as that happened, as soon as the fall from man happened, the distortion with humans also happened. And so you see kind of what were some of the motivating factors for Eve when she fell, and then Adam, and then you go on to Cain. So like with Eve, I see just a grasping, like a greed for something that wasn't hers and wasn't hers to take. And so she saw it, she thought she could take it, and she did. I see with Adam, I see a passivity of like, not my problem kind of thing, and then blaming the other. And then with Cain, I see a certain jealousy that came from seeing somebody who had something that they didn't have. And so like those kind of three things have been really at the heart of like when I think about politics and motivations and what's driving, we could talk about with all the regions that Aida and I have worked in of like what were the motivating factors. I think they kind of come down to that is, elements of greed and jealousy, and then just a passivity from everybody else. And perhaps if I could add on to that, because it's like, okay, you could see why one aggressor goes to war, but why, if you kind of go to your story of like, why does everybody else join? I think we tend to then kind of play on that with a certain fear. Like we have everybody play in fear, and like you have to kind of gang in together because it's us versus them. And so we create very quickly these categories of us versus them that dehumanizes the people in front of us out of a certain fear. So that's kind of my thoughts.
Aida, what do you think about that?
I think I agree with Maria, but what came to my mind is the most 2 points, which is greedy. We want to have more of what is not our right, and for me, more and more is like in our recent time is seriously, there is no God in the hearts. There's no God in the hearts. It's like we create our own God. Like we put a picture of a God that we want him to obey to all our greediness and what we want. Because all the war comes with no peace, with killing, with victims, with vulnerable people. And when you come to the heart of God, you will not find this. You will not find that his heart was so soft towards any vulnerability. So when I see vulnerable people in front of me, exactly like what you had been saying, like deep inside, that's not what we want to do. But in front of like aggressiveness and greediness of the big bosses or the leaders, we like follow. And I heard a lot of people, Mina, that they had been involved in killing others. And they are even saying that at that time they were involved in killing because that's what they believed, that this is God's order for them. After killing and after seeing the blood, they felt that this cannot be God. So if the real God is there, it will not be that type of like aggressiveness towards each other.
So what's fascinating about what the two of you just said is you basically boiled it down to three things: greed, fear, and ideology. So people are greedy, people are afraid, yes, and people have their own preconceived ideas of how things ought to be done.
Right.
So they'll kill in the name of religion, they'll kill in the name of what they perceive the other person is doing. That's fascinating because I was just listening to a lecture about that, and it's exactly what you two articulated. So it's interesting how that just sort of pans out perfectly.
Yeah. I think, Chris, I didn't listen to the same and I didn't read it, but practically, and I think Maria will agree with me, that when you listen to the people who were involved, if they are the one who has the upper hand or the vulnerable, both of them, they were not happy with what's going on. It's unfair. It's that's not the truth. That's not God's shape, that the way he created us to be. So when we are out of this, that's what the result that you can see.
I'm going to take a step back for a second because it's important here to kind of define context a little bit. Because last week we were just talking about marriage and relationships, and today we're talking. So, I think it's very fitting to talk about war after marriage.
I had somebody tell me that too, actually. So,
really?
yeah.
But so the point is, and you might be wondering the same, like, how did you guys get to this, like, this topic and conversation today? And the thing is, we have been talking about relationships, and we've been talking about what is God's intention behind the relationship between humanity, and for man and woman, and man, as friends, as siblings, as married couples, father and son, any type of relationship that God has ordained. And we've talked about what that actually means in friendship and singleness, in marriage. And today we're actually, when we're talking about war, we're talking about the distortion of that relationship. When man decides not to love his brother, and decides to put greed first, and decides to put his own pride first.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of psychologists have talked about the psychology of war, and they boiled it down to the idea that every man, even if you're talking about, even if you make war about principles, really it's mostly about looting and taking something that belongs to someone else, that doesn't belong to you. And we find that a lot, especially in civil wars, where we see a lot of that. But you also might be wondering, like I said in the beginning, what does this what does it have to do with you and me and you? A couple of things. One is that when we're talking about war, we tend to be very desensitized because we're so far from big major conflicts that it doesn't seem to affect us, and we tend to normalize it. And two, you don't realize how much you actually have in common between your own conflicts and major world conflicts outside. And I think by taking a step back, talk about war conflicts and the conflict in Palestine and Israel, or like between Pakistan, India, and Kashmir, and or whatever's happening in the Middle East, whatever is happening anywhere in the world, Ukraine and Russia, whichever conflict, choose one and look at what's happening in that conflict from both sides, and then look at conflicts in your own life and compare the reasons why these conflicts starts and the conflicts in your own life start. Because every major conflict that we have ever known as humanity has always started by one act of pride, by jealousy, one small factor that starts in my life and your life, that is exactly what leads to all these major conflicts everywhere in the world. So it just requires to take a step back and think about that for a second. So tell me, you both have been in pretty rough places, war-stricken places in the middle of conflicts. Talk to me a little bit about how far have you seen that go? What does war do to people? What does conflict do to people in from a social sense, from the cultural sense, from the religious sense, financial sense? Kind of give me a brief understanding of what you saw on the ground. Maria.
I mean, you do see so much. I guess the thing is, you never really know what it's like until you have to walk through a refugee camp or a displacement camp, and to see what a camp is like, and see people who are living in such inhumane conditions and have been living there for years, you know, in tents and camps, that have, you know, overheated in the summer, no heat in the winter, and flooded, and all these other things. And just kind of this idea of like, how could you live in this? And they say, this is safer than whatever option we have otherwise. We would rather live in these inhumane conditions than the idea of going home. So I think it's just heartbreaking to really see. And you see the kids going around in the streets, and but you also see kind of the resiliency of life, of like, every refugee camp has a marketplace, and they have people who started their own businesses, and they've started their own, you know, side hustles, so to speak. You know, I think I've been to refugee camps in Greece and stuff where like there were barbershops that were getting started, and people were kind of coming up with like little ways to build balconies around their tents and do these things. And so you see this striving for life in the midst of this unknown of, you know, unknown and inhumane treatment of people. But again, it's not an inhumane from a side of people are actually trying to hurt them. Like I would say inhumane, even just the conditions themselves, as we are trying to do our best to support and it still doesn't feel it still doesn't feel human enough oftentimes, in terms of what we as humanitarians are trying to do. And then I would also say, you know, one of the biggest things that has affected me is so you kind of have categories of people when there's war. There's people who've like stayed and lived in the conflict. There's people who have kind of left the country and are trying to start a new life. And then there's people who kind of are in the middle, or we'll call them like the internally displaced, who are kind of just trying to wait it out in a safer area until the conflict happens and they can go back. I've always been, you know, I think we hear a lot about the refugees, but I think what I found the people I have found the most interesting have been those other two categories, the people who like lived in it, who thought that, you know, this was the right thing. It was right to let in, you know, these aggressors. It was right to, like, it would somehow help them get more free or kind of address whatever problem they thought was happening. And instead the opposite happened. And you'd see this kind of shift of like, we're ready to hear something new. We're ready, like this didn't work. And we're kind of ready to see something else. And then those who are choosing to try to hope in the midst of, like, I would say those displaced people who haven't given up entirely and are just kind of wanting to see, like, we're ready to see what else is out there and how we can kind of build after this is all done. So there's this hope of it ending and hope of, you know, something good coming out of it.
And you've seen, and I'll take this to Aida then. So Aida, you've seen, I would presume, something very similar to what Maria is talking about here, is that there are groups of people kind of internalize conflict and war in very different ways. Some are ready to flee, some are not ready to be there and build, some are worried for their families. What has been your experience?
It's the 2/3 of what Maria is talking about. I was never in a refugee camp. So I always go to the country where the conflict is. I never experienced a refugee camp, and we don't usually in our service, we don't serve refugees. We believe that we want to strengthen them to stay where they are as much as they can. We are not forcing them, but if they can, we help them. So I experienced something when you start asking this question. It came to me April 2017 in Syria, where I was there for the first visit. And at that time, the war did not, like, bombing the places and sending dangerous weapons was not stopping yet. So I experienced a few of that. Like, I was on the top roof visiting some families, and I saw one of it like flying on top of us, and it just was sent far. And the Syrians are very aware of the type. So they would say, this is coming to us, this is going the other side, this is the voice of that one. And for me, like, not experiencing that before, honestly, I was praying to go back as a one body to my family, not like in pieces. And even Chris, you are like, one of the nights I was sleeping in the hotel, and I was like just thinking, from the amount of death and bombing I heard in the 4 days, I was thinking that if anything happened to me, even my husband will not find the body. Like, there will not be a body to receive. He will just know that she died. So, but in the middle of that, I found,
I think we lost Aida for a second.
Leaders who would serve. Okay, am I back?
Yeah,
where did you lose me?
You found leaders who would serve.
Yeah, in Syria especially, and they choose. They had the ability to leave, and they choose to be there to serve their communities. And some of them, they faced the highest level of danger. And one of the ladies, she said, this was my life mission during the war. All my life, I was serving my church on Sundays, but this time, this was my life mission. I was there to serve my people, and she put herself into a lot of danger. So in the middle of this, you find real heroes. So I worked with people who are inside the conflict and they choose to be there. They choose to have, some of them, they don't have any other choices. Some of them, they choose to be there in the midst of all danger to serve their communities. But also I experienced, Maria, she knows, I experienced some of the internally displaced. So in Iraq and in Nigeria, we served some communities who left their places and moved to more safe area until they have, exactly as she said, they have all the hope to go back. I witness, and I think she knows what I'm talking about, I witness some of them, they saw by faith that they will go back to their land. And no one of us as people who come to visit the country, we believed in them. We felt like this is not even faith, this is imagination. They got the land, and their village was completely burnt. They rebuilt it and they returned back to their land. And just from few days, Mina, when I told you I'm in Iraq, that was the graduation of that village from our program, because they are completely back, they are completely independent now, and we can leave them and go to another community. So yes, the war and that kind of displacing people around is like very uncomfortable. But guess what? Sometimes it's chances to people to get the best out of them, things that they don't even imagine that it is there. No one would love to be there, but when it comes, like even that priest, he was saying that we hate that time, but you know what? We were very strong at that time. So you get the best out of the people when you put them under that kind of, it's not fair, but it happened, and you get the best out of it from them.
So what you're saying is that even though war is never God's intention, even though war is not something that God ordains or God wants, when it does happen because of our own distortion and need for pride and greed and all these things, that God still manages to show us some beautiful lessons in the midst of it.
Yeah.
You both spoke a lot.
I think this one's almost an easier one when talk about like why God, because I think people I have spoken to, they'll usually get this one. They'll say, we understand this was people who've done this. This is not just, God, like it's not a natural disaster. It's not something like I think people recognize that we've brought this upon, each other. And, that kind of comes with its own ramifications, I guess, in terms of how you look at other people, how you treat them, and how do you perceive them and how do you perceive God? Like in that time, the question is much more about like, God, why didn't you stop certain things? But it definitely, I think people recognize that this is something we do to ourselves.
But also, I guess we have to also recognize and not brush off the fact that this is devastating by all measures.
Yes. And many leave the country, like many, especially youth, like Syria. You cannot find a lot of youth, especially men. You cannot find a lot of youth inside the country. They leave. They cannot feel any future. It's very hard to ask them about a future. But
sorry, I was just going to say, like, I think there are so many other effects of war that we don't even realize. Like we see, certain families, certain communities that have just been like completely shattered because when the war happened, everybody fled. So like some people, they went to France, some people went to Germany, some people went to Australia or whatever. And so now this family that was their support system, to use the Arabic for word, the ashira, like the tribe that was all gathered together and all these things. Now everyone's spread in a different direction. And because they're going as refugees, they're never going to be able to see each other again. Like they can't afford it. They're not allowed to come back. There's all these things. And so a family just breaks apart. in the name of safety. You see the same thing in people's cultures, cultures that kind of held fast and held together. Now they don't know what to do with themselves, particularly much smaller cultures that have been, again, like they just don't know, the elders of that culture can't hold on to it as people are leaving, as people are going, and as people are kind of losing faith. So I think there's all these other secondary effects, not to mention the personal trauma and, psychological damage that happens to people as that, and it's hard to see. Like, I think there's an interesting dynamic. I was thinking when Aida was telling her story of when I was first in Iraq, and I was in a community that had been displaced, and they were all coming back to start rebuilding. And so I was having lunch with two of my Iraqi coworkers in this town, and we hear this big boom happening,
Mm-hmm.
and like we're having lunch. I like jump up, and I'm like, what was that? All these, and like my Iraqi coworkers, they like did not break a sweat or did not break a beat. Like I just kept eating. And I was like, guys, don't you care what this was? Like, this is still kind of new. And they're like, trust me, if all you did was hear it, you're fine. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
And there was just this almost cynical joking about war that was just disturbing to me when I first got there. But then I also realized that's how people cope. People's trauma and how they process it, especially in the absence of, there's not this army of therapists and counselors who are available for the hundreds of thousands of people who've been affected. People just learn to cope in different ways with that, whether that be through humor or support or something else. But yeah, so.
Have you both found that there are almost people at odds whenever there's a conflict like that? You'll always have those who are angry at the conflict, and because of their anger, there's more aggression involved in their attitude towards their family and their friends. And then there are those who are like very pacifists, and like they want nothing to do with the war, and they want to make sure that there's peace involved. And then there are some who are just like there's apathy, who are just willing to just sit there and do nothing. They're not willing to fight, and they're not promoting peace, and they are just kind of there. And that reminds me a lot of like also how we internalize our own conflicts here. Maybe we're not at a major war, but in a lot of times we'll see that in many circumstances, some of us will seek out conflict, and we are going to whichever, if it's at work or with family, we're always, we're never backing down from a fight. We're always looking for a fight. Some will want to avoid one at all cost, and some, whether they're directly involved or bystanders, they are okay just watching a conflict happen. I hate to say this, but a lot of us here, when conflict happens overseas, of course there's only a limited amount of things we can do, but a lot of us do nothing. Maria, you mentioned before, when you talked about this, that group of do nothing, when we sit down and do nothing during conflict, how do we deal with that? How does that affect us as people, as watchers who are just sitting and enjoying the show, when it comes to watching other people's conflicts? And what is really our role when it comes to these things?
I think the more time I was spending out in the region, the more I saw the truth of, like, I would continue to meditate on that verse, that perfect love casts out fear.
Mm-hmm.
And just thinking that the opposite of love is not hate, it's fear. And I think that's really what pulls so much of us away, is that we're just so fearful of what could happen to us in a situation that it just I think we dehumanize the people we see that are suffering, or even the effect, I'd say, even like, it's not just you see war and you need to get involved, but we all, I think, and again, not to get too much into politics, we all recognize there are certain acts in the way we buy things, in the way that we do things. In the back of our minds, we know it's somehow hurting on a larger systematic scale, the rest of the world. but we choose to do nothing about it. And we choose, what we have, because we can't see that. And because we are, somehow we only think of people who are like, I guess it's hard for us to really recognize the dignity of people unless they're standing right in front of you. And even then, I think we've gotten cynical on that side. And so when you just see it on a screen, or you just see it far away, or you kind of think about that, we lose that ability to see people as God has seen them. And I think, but I also will recognize, particularly the passiveness that happens within a country, is to not be passive requires a certain act of heroism, as Aida was saying. And that's hard. Like we are being asked to be heroes, and none of us look at ourselves as heroes. And it takes to love is to take risks. And I don't know, it's just something that I think perhaps because we've gotten so comfortable, I don't know what it is that makes us so against the idea of taking risks. I don't know, Aida, what you think?
Aida, can you hear us?
Maybe not.
I'll come back to Aida. There's a lot of what you say that talks about and touches on hope, the concept of hope. Because it seems that like the story of redemption and the story of rebuilding and the story of having faith and taking risk, it's all worth, like it's got to be worth something, and it's got to be fueled by something. And it sounds like a lot of that is just hope, or what is it? What do you think is what's fueling all of this?
I think it's hope, definitely. It's also a sense of justice. Like when I see the people who are really motivated, I think
I was cut it. So I think
No
I
problem.
was not. I'm so
We
sorry.
got you
Something
back.
happening.
It's
Yeah,
okay.
I'm sorry.
We got you back.
I'm sorry.
I think like people are motivated by a sense, and I think it's a great thing for us to unpack, like what is justice? What truly does that mean? And why is it important? Like, because we say God is a God of justice. And I think it's become such a distorted word in our world. But I do think it's worth thinking about, because I do think those are the two main things that would drive people either to get involved when they don't have to, or, to kind of hopefully live in the midst of it. So.
Justice. Chris, what do you think about justice?
You gotta ask me a random question like that.
It's a loaded term.
I think this whole conversation's I've been sitting back listening, because in hearing you both describe what it's like to be in the midst of a war-stricken country doesn't sound much different from what it's like to be here, where we see many brothers and sisters in front of us suffering, and we're sort of apathetic to it.
Yes.
We can walk by a homeless person who is struggling and not even blink. We can see a person who is a sex worker and not ever look at that person as our brother and sister or sister in Christ. It's just so easy for us to turn a blind eye when it's something that doesn't pertain to us. So it's just interesting to hear the both of you talk, because I'm trying to figure out, like, for those who are listening to this podcast tonight, they're like, wow, these two women are amazing. They've been right in the thick of war-stricken countries, but I'm really struggling to relate to that. I'm really struggling to figure out, okay, like, all right, say I don't swipe on my Facebook page of what's happening in Syria. Say I don't, like, I want to do something. Say I feel like I want to pray for the folks that are going through a hard time. Is that enough? Like, what more can I do? Like, can I donate? Do I, like, go and serve with Aida with Take Heart? Like, what should people's responses to what the two of you are saying this evening be? Should it be one that they... Go ahead, Aida.
Yeah, the thing that attracted my attention, and I feel so upset when I see it, is exactly what Mina said in the beginning, which is we are normalizing situations. If we stop normalizing it, if we stop feeling that it's not me. Let's be anyone else. Why should I be caring? Many Egyptians, they came to me and they said, why you are not only serving Egyptians? That's not fair. Egypt has a lot to be done in it. The idea of what you had been saying, Chris, that the body of Christ idea is not in our soul and mind and hearts. All what is in our hearts is my church, my community, my class, and then it shrink more to be my family. And unfortunately, it shrink more and more and more to be me and my wife and my husband and my kids. And going back to what you have been saying, Mina, all the conflict that we had in our homes is because normalizing came to the extent between me and my spouse. So even when my spouse is feeling something, I normalize it. It's not my business. It's not me. So, and unfortunately, the world now is pushing us more and more to be that people. But I'm sorry to say, this is not Christ. This is not us. And if we leave it that way, we are very far from our faith. Very far. He said it all. If any part of the body is in pain, the whole body is in pain. So going back to what you had been saying, Chris, yes, it is a call to feel, to have a certain area of service, but it is a must that every one of us, it's biblical, every one of us has to have a call. Where is the call? How to do it? That's fine. But the call is to go out of yourself, is not to normalize situations. Exactly as you, Chris, said. Not to normalize to say that this is a homeless. That's fine. A kid in our church that is on drugs. That's fine. A friend that is going into divorce. That's fine. That's not fine. That's your responsibility. Otherwise, you are not the body of Christ. Don't claim that we are the body of Christ. And I think that's what pushed out of this box, because I am personally, I could not sleep when it was Syria and Iraq in front of me. They are losing their life for his name. So how come it's not us? And all of us, we were so touched by the 21 martyrs in Libya, and we were so proud of them. Okay, what did you do? Like, it's not enough to be proud. It's not enough, Chris and Mina, to say, oh, Aida and Maria are good ladies. Seriously? We are not. We just follow a call, and we are happy to follow it. So it's not normalize it. It's actually attract my attention so much, Mina, and that's what we do. And telling you the truth also, I feel so sad when I see Egyptian, Iraqi, Syrian. I feel like, who said that Syria has a problem? Who said that Iraq has a problem? Who said that Egypt, Nigeria has a problem? As if it's not only normalize it, it's we intentionally make ourselves blind against anything that will tickle
and if I could add
our
to that,
conscious, telling us that we have to do something. Yes, please go ahead.
Well, so one of the things that has really struck me, particularly in terms of serving the Middle East, and I think I've gotten the same comments as Aida in the past of, why aren't you just helping, our own? I think we also intentionally forget how connected we are to these people. So it was actually an Iraqi who once told, we love how many, so I'll speak to our Egyptian crowd here. How many times have we heard the "Blessed is Egypt, my people" verse? It was an Iraqi who told me the rest of that verse. The rest of that verse is Assyria, my what is it? Assyria, my handwork, and Israel, the work of my hands, or something like that.
Mhm.
that we're together. Like that verse was not meant for Egypt by itself.
Yes. Yes.
And
Wait, what do you
but-
mean? God doesn't only care about Egyptians?
No, he's not.
I mean, he loves, and I think
I can assure you he's not.
Are you serious? What do you mean? I thought that was we were the blessed people of God, and we're the only people to be cared for.
we are blessed, but we're not the only ones. I think that's the thing is like there are brothers. They say there's going to be a high, like there's prophecy about a highway between Egypt and Assyria.
And yeah, actually, that's right. Every time we are in Iraq, they told us about this.
Exactly. They love that verse. They love that verse more than that. And I'd never heard of it before.
Yeah.
So
and I think there's go ahead.
No, go ahead, Maria. Finish.
Like I think there is this recognition of like it was a privilege. It was a privilege to be part of these things and to see God like be part of God's story in these places on this global scale. Because these were all places that like are mentioned in the Bible. Like so when I served in Greece, I can't tell you, like I'd say 5 out of the 7 refugee camps I worked with, or like areas I worked with, are mentioned by name in the book of Acts.
Mm-hmm.
The Nineveh Plains, right? Like this is where we did, and it is so cool to be part of God's work when like he has prophesied about these places and he cares about them and he makes an attention. Like our God is a God of real places and real people. And he still cares about that. And we think about the prophecies of the Old Testament and they talk about nations. I would say a huge majority of the Old Testament talks about prophecies about nations. And so I think we like to spiritualize and say things are very individual, but that's not the heart of God. God he cares for individuals, but he also cares for peoples and groups and nations, and he mentions them and he has plans for them. And I think, like I said, I think it's just a privilege to be able to be part of that and be able to be part of that story.
So for those who are listening, you hear these wonderful ladies talk about all of our responsibility towards one another as the body of Christ, as fellow humans. We had an episode on human dignity earlier in this season. We talked about all people are created in the image and likeness of God, and because they're created in the image and likeness of God, we dignify and we want to elevate all humanity to where they ought to be. And I think it's really powerful to hear kind of the on-the-ground heroism that you see of people standing up and leaders that are rising up and people that believe wholeheartedly that God is going to bring them back and restore their land and bring peace. They feel this sense of faith and hope. Sometimes, I'll be honest with the two of you, I'll be on reading the news and I'll say that the Middle East is hopeless. And I believe that God is present, and I believe that God is able to heal all things, right? But there is, like you said, this sense of like apathy that grows within people to say, the Middle East, all they like to do is fight with one another. They just like, there's just this like desire for conflict, and it just must be like brothers and sisters within our own communities can't have peace with one another. So how do we expect countries to have peace with one another and peoples to have peace with one another? And I think that's kind of the whole point of this episode of like, why do we always fight, and why do we have these conflict, and how do we believe that there is hope in the midst of this conflict, right? When all we do is hear about wars and rumors of war, and even in the book of Matthew it talks about that, right? There will be wars and rumors of war, and know that the end is not yet, right? It's not yet that there is going to this will happen. This is the reality of human existence. So what do you say to folks when they have the perspective that I just shared, which is it's just a hopeless cause, you know? Like, Maria, what do you think? I'll let you start, and then Aida, you jump in.
So, I mean, I have felt that too. I've been in the midst of working and toiling and having some security incident happen that you're like, oh my gosh, what I've just worked for the last several years is about to kind of go up in flames. So I relate to that. But I think I've also been, I hold on to that verse of in Hebrews where it says like, I'm gonna butcher the verse, so forgive me, of like, you see the hope at a distance and you are assured of it, and kind of like, it talks about the men of faith who die having seen the promise from a distance, and they didn't get it, but they saw the promise for a distance and they kept going towards it. And I think that's how we're called to live, is we know that God, there is going to be a new heaven and a new earth, and there is redemption, and there's people. And then so like we strive towards that, and we kind of use those, we kind of, maybe selfishly so, we lean on those heroes and the story, like the individual stories of redemption and presence that we see. And that's kind of something I wish, and, you know, those of us who've been there and need to do a better job about, of really showing of all those people, like Aida was saying, who are staying, who are doing like amazing, amazing things in the midst of this suffering, and who are heroic, and who have learned to love and care, and, you know, so I think, so that's one side of it. I would say the other side is ever since I kind of started on all of this, I've been intrigued by how Jesus uses Samaria in his kind of teaching.
Mm-hmm.
So at the very end, he says that, you know, his disciples will preach in Judea, Samaria, and all the ends of the earth.
Yes.
We kind of, we jump, I think we tend to talk about Judea, and we talk about the ends of the earth. But we kind of forget the Samaria parts. And what is Samaria? But Samaria is the one that actually, like, Jesus uses Samaria and the Good Samaritan and the Samaritan, like, as an example of a person that we should be following. And so amongst
Maria,
the Jews...
sorry, break down for us first what Judea and the ends of the earth are.
So I would say Judea is home.
So is Jerusalem,
say, you know,
is Jerusalem home too? Is that like just like where does Jerusalem fall into that?
So like Jerusalem would be the capital of Judea. So you as a Jew, it's so like that's kind of central. Like let's say your home, and then your town or your community would be Judea.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'd say the ends of the earth is everyone that you
Everywhere
don't know,
else.
everyone that like doesn't matter to you,
Mm-hmm.
kind of thing. Samaria is the brother who's your enemy, essentially. And if you think about it, it's the people who were, so who were the Samaritans? The Samaritans were Jews. Originally, they used to be Jews. And then kind of when the split of Israel happened, everybody got displaced. And then there were these new people who came in who didn't follow the law of, and so they were considered kind of this like corrupted version of Judaism. And the Jews didn't like them, and they kind of didn't get along together. As we read in the story of the Samaritan woman, like Jews and Samaritans don't have any dealings with each other.
They mix with other nations.
They don't mix, right? Like we're just like they're kind of they considered them traitors. Like they've abandoned the faith, they've left. But reality is like their origins are the same as the Jews.
Mm-hmm.
But it was the Samaritans who were like, when Jesus talked about loving your neighbor, he talked about a Samaritan who came and loved an enemy person, a Jew. And when he gives examples of different, well, maybe that's the example that really has come to mind because that was the one that we always pulled out. But this idea of we are called to the brother who we don't get along with, especially, I would say. And I think we have a closer calling to them. Like it's easy for us to just focus on our home or focus on the people who've never done us wrong. But I think really true loving of your neighbor comes of the neighbor who you don't get along with and is active and is not just, I think oftentimes we've heard of love just meaning that like we're not hurting them. But that's not when we talk about loving your neighbor and people ask Jesus, what does it mean to love your neighbor? It is the Good Samaritan who went and took a risk to help out this guy who was on the street. He stopped his car. Stopped his way on the dangerous road, picked up his wounds, like cost him money, cost him his safety, cost him his dignity to be able to do this. And I think that's, again, it's for a people who was not his own. And who he knew there was an animosity towards.
That's very, very convicting, Maria. That's very convicting because I think we love Jerusalem, Judea, and the ends of the world. I totally agree with you. Like, easy to love my brother, easy to love somebody who's totally different than me, or who I've never had conflict with, but so difficult to love the brother who I don't get along with. Or, in fact, not just love the brother who I don't get along with, love the brother who I hate. And that relates very much to all of our day-to-day lives, right? Like, if you can't practice that in the everyday life, how do you practice that in caring for the world on a more global scale, right? Like, that's very convicting, because I just think Christ says that, right? Like, if you can't love your brother whom you see, how do you love God whom you can't see, right? Like, it's a real paradox, and it's a real challenge to every single one of us, that I think you can't just listen to this podcast and be like, oh, that's a cute command, that go to Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the ends of the earth. Like, that's like a real command from God. That's the Great Commission, right? Like, that's like what we're all called to do. So where does Samaria fall into that? And how do we actually live that out?
You know, it's when Maria, when you were telling this this meditation, the contemplation you've had, to bring this home, the first thought that came to mind, and I'm not going to get into any politics, but the first thought that came to mind when you talked about the conflict in Samaria is the political like turmoil we live in this country. Like, that people are like brothers, but they have become enemies over politics. And they're unable to reconcile and see that. So I can this is very convicting, because it is very hard and difficult to do. I think it is very difficult to say, and to go back to what you were saying earlier, is to say, I am going to look at this and I'm going to see how I am going to find my calling in all of this. I'm going to not sit and do nothing. And I believe sincerely that I have a reason to get up. I'm not going to just share a nice post, tell a friend about a story. I'm not going to just maybe donate to an organization, but there is an active participation in conflict, because we have a role in reconciliation, whether it's on a personal level, on a community level, family level, or on an international level, because technically international crises start with a smaller conflict. It's never just born as a big war out of nothing. It always starts with something small. If some presidents can heed the word of God and proper counsel and forget their own pride, maybe certain wars would have never happened. If man is never pursuing greed to just be rich, maybe you're gonna spend a little bit of time looking at your neighbor who's in need and redefining what those boundaries and borders are. These two are the same. A president who declares war and someone who refuses to resolve conflict with his boss have some things in common. I'm not saying you're just as you're a murderer, you're a Hitler because you're choosing not to reconcile. But there are some small seeds of elements that we have in common when we choose to not actively participate in the healing and the reconciliation of our community. Aida, share with me some final thoughts that you have.
When you were talking, Mina, I was listening carefully about the idea of we are away from this war, we are away from this conflict. So what can we do here? Let me put this into how I'm thinking. I'm thinking that the world is going more and more in darkness, and going on in Syria, Iraq, Nigeria, Egypt, any country that has big site of conflict, and between here. It's only that the conflict looks different. And that's exactly what you said. We had been fighting for politics to the extent that out of pride, no one of us want to say sorry, want to say, no, I was wrong, want to say, even if our thoughts are not the same, we can still be friends and brothers and sisters. So you can say clearly that even growing up our kids here, there is a lot of darkness. My own way of thinking is, if I am not the light every day, I will lose it. If I don't understand what does it mean to be the salt and the light in this world, I will lose it. Going back, starting from dealing with my spouse, dealing with my kids, dealing with the conflict at work, dealing with the bosses that are aggressive and bad, and dealing with the conflict in families, in communities, in our churches, up to being called to go to serve the Lord in other countries. If we don't choose to be the light in this darkness every day, we will not do it. We will be merged into the darkness that is surrounding us. And yes, Chris, you said that it's far away, it's something away from us. Believe me, and I think I shared that with Mina, when I am in these countries that I go and stay for a few weeks, and Maria stay for even much more than that, I feel much more joy than when I'm here. So sometimes when it is more conflict, more insecure, more not everything guaranteed, and you depend more on him, your joy, your deep peace is much more inside you, more than having everything secured, okay, and you close your eyes on the real darkness that we are living in. So my last comment, Mina, is if we want to go out of this episode with anything, focus to be the light every day. Focus to deliver him in a way or another. You are doctors, you are Maria is like having big future of in the nonprofit. Every one of us, wherever we are, especially in our churches, especially in our small groups, bring light to the table, because darkness is become more dark, and now it is our light to come more shining. Otherwise, it will be very hard. That's my last comment.
Amen to
There is
that.
no difference between here and everywhere else. It's what we decide to do on daily basis, carrying his name, carrying the name of being Christian. It means light and salt.
Amen. Maria, what can someone learn from conflicts overseas and apply to their lives here? People who hear stories and are unable to go on travel to help, and hear about all these stories and conflicts. What can you share with us, that some valuable lessons that people can use here to deal with their own conflicts?
I think one of the things that I have tried to, somebody once told me a comment that has just kind of stuck with me, and I see it kind of, again, as it expands out onto a global level, but still applies on a local level of like, we don't know how to disagree well. Basically, we don't know how to fight well. And so we sit there and we either avoid the conflict using that passivity until everything explodes, or we hold on to it for dear life as if it's the most important thing in the world. And I think there's this, what I've been trying to practice since, it's funny, when I think of conflict, I actually don't even, when I hear the word conflict, I don't even think about the conflict, like the war. I would think about the conflicts that were in my own office as I was leading that office. That those were the ones that would kind of give me stress more so than whatever, the security situation was happening. Because again, it is the little that translates into the big. But one of the things that I think I have tried to change perspective on has, again, that idea of like the opposite of love is not hate, it's fear. I think we don't think of ourselves as hateful people. We might think of other people as hateful people, but we would never think of ourselves as hateful people. But I think we can all relate to being fearful of something. And so when I'm getting angry or upset about something or in conflict, I've been trying to come back to like, what am I afraid of? What's the fear that is driving, whatever is happening and what these feelings are? And then trying to empathize on the other side of like, what is the fear that is driving whatever the other side of this conflict is? And how can I basically address that fear in love? And that's been the attitude that I've been trying to shift in the way that, I think we are called to, like, there's a reason Jesus said, blessed are the peacemakers. It's not a passive thing. to be a peacemaker. It is a very active.
It's very hard, actually. It's very hard.
It's very hard, and it means getting into the mess. It means about
Yeah.
hearing truths that you don't want to hear.
Yes. Yes.
Humility, that to ask for forgiveness and all these things,
Mhm.
but it is a sacred thing. That's why he says, "Blessed are the peacemakers."
Because people tend to think of peacemakers as people who are just willing to take a step back and they don't want to
Yes.
get their hands dirty. They're going to let things go. And you're saying it's got nothing to do with
No,
Mhm.
no. I mean, peacemakers, they get into it.
Those are
you know-
peacekeepers.
Right.
No,
right.
peacekeepers are the ones who are just trying to like keep things
Right.
separate. But
Yeah.
peacemakers are different.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, sorry, Maria, but peacemakers are the one that are able to come in and make peace. Like, it's like not only to just like keep it, no, they are the one who made it. Like they
It's
are,
an active process.
it's an active light process. It's like, again, it's you're coming into the dark and put light.
And I think it's an issue of just not telling people, oh, you guys just all should get along and everybody
Yes.
should love each other, and like papering over whatever injustice or wrong has happened. But it is kind of letting truth and letting forgiveness and letting justice come out of it.
Mhm.
So
Yeah. That's beautiful.
Hmm.
I need to be a better peacemaker. I've been a peacekeeper.
I'm very convicted by this conversation in a lot of ways. I think in listening to both of you speak about what you've seen on the ground and kind of your experiences, it makes me question how I live day-to-day life in terms of whether the ideologies or the things that you mentioned that lead to war, greed, fear, ideology, etc. If I actually work on not letting myself get into personal wars with other people, right? Like, I think there is this idea that war is this like large thing, and I think Mina's alluded to this a bunch earlier, but like, what am I doing on a day-to-day basis to be, like Aida said, that salt and light? What am I doing on a day-to-day basis to actually create peace, to actually, I remember understanding what the real meaning of peace is to make something whole, to like kind of bring this sense of oneness to something. And the opposite of peace is not suffering or war. The opposite of peace is disunity, discord, right?
Yeah.
So how do I bring unity to things? How do I come into situations and make them more whole by the presence that God has in me? How do I not let my greed get ahead of me of trying to advance in my workplace and pushing people aside? How do I not like be afraid of people taking advantage of me and let fear dictate like me being hostile towards others and creating divisions? How do I not let my ideologies or my political affiliations or what I perceive to be the things that I identify as cause division between me and my neighbor? And I think that challenges me very much, because I don't think I'm living up to the standard that God has for every single one of us. I don't think I'm living to the standard of entering into brokenness and trying to bring oneness and unity to it. So I just pray that those who are looking at Syria and those who are looking at Iraq and those who are looking at war-stricken countries don't look at those things as things that are happening far off, but things that are happening on a day-to-day basis within their own lives, and within my own life, that I can be more of a peacemaker and I can be more of a one who brings unity to places, and one who believes that there is unity in diversity, right? That there is this like sense of like, I can be totally in opposites with you, but still have so much unity with you. I don't have to see eye to eye with you, but I could walk hand in hand with you. And I think that's my, that's the thing that really challenges me tonight from what you both have spoken about, is being that person who is a hero by standing in the gap, by not running away from conflict, by entering into it, to bring peace and oneness to the situations that I'm brought to. Because not all of us are called to war-stricken countries, but we're all called to be peacemakers, right? Like you.
I want to shed light on all the heroes that you guys have met overseas and in war-stricken places who have been resilient and steadfast in building. And I want to say that if a mother who lost a child
Yes.
or a family in war can forgive, then if you're listening to this, so can you.
Yes.
If someone has lost everything in war in Syria, Iraq, Ukraine,
Yeah.
anywhere in the world, and they had the will and the desire and the hope to go back and rebuild, so can you. If anyone has lost financial gains, if they lost all their savings, if they've lost all their money, and they still went back and still worked hard, took on modest jobs to climb back the ladder, so can you. So don't you have two roles here. One, you might be part of a conflict that you need to figure out how to resolve, or you might be an onlooker at a conflict that you've got nothing to do with. In both of these situations, you have something to do. You have a role to play. The most precious and the most direct mission that God has done for us as human being is reconciliation.
Amen.
Like he has given every last ounce of blood in order to reconcile. So I look at myself and I ask myself tonight, after hearing these wonderful stories that Maria and Aida shared, like, what am I giving in order to reconcile? What discomfort have I gone through in order to reconcile and resolve my own conflict? When I'm seeing someone broken, when I'm refusing to turn to my brother to address our issues. I mean, Matthew talks about this extensively when he gives the outline. I think it's in chapter
5, 6, and 7. Yeah,
maybe. Yeah, when he talks about if you go to your brother first and you speak to him privately, and if he doesn't
Yeah,
listen,
that's
you go
7.
grab a few friends. Yeah. And you have them talk to him. And if he doesn't listen, you go to the
Right.
church. And like, that's not giving up. That's not giving up on conflict. We understand that every circumstance and every situation is different, of course. But the point we're hoping to drive home is that if God has given you the grace and the vision to resolve a conflict, in a way, go ahead and resolve it.
Yeah.
Seek out opportunities, seek out conflicts to resolve. Don't just sit there passively and share and do beautiful things on social media, which are necessary and needed to spread the word, but do not take that as a form of action. There's so much more that can be done. We're so amazed and we're so encouraged by you two, Maria and Aida, everything that you've done, everything that you continue to do for humanity, for God, for the church, for his people, and for encouragement for all of us. And I pray that God can continue to give you more bountifully so that you can produce more and heal more, and that we can learn so much more from you. If you've listened to this today and you've been inspired by these two ladies, they're both tagged in this post. I think they wouldn't mind if you reach out to them directly for any questions, for any guidance. We would love that, and I'm sure they would love that as well. If you are new to the podcast, make sure that you find us on Facebook. Please like or follow the page so that we know you're here. Send us messages, tell us what you think. Share your opinions and comments. We love to hear from you. And we love to make new friends. Check us out on Google Podcasts, on Apple Podcasts, on Alexa, and whichever
every podcast platform you can think of. We're there.
Yeah, we love
and don't forget to check out Mission Take Heart. They're doing some amazing work. Aida's doing some amazing work, and feel free to connect, serve with them, donate. There's a lot of amazing work that's happening within our communities, and I think we need to lift up the people who are doing these amazing efforts.
But also, Chris and Mina, you are invited to come with me. That's not enough now. After this podcast and after talking about it that way, Maria
now.
just came back. Yeah, now you are invited to come.
Oh, Aida.
I just came back. Absolutely. And it's, guys, let's go. Let's make a podcast from there.
Oh, man.
That would be great, guys.
Oh, man.
Right. I'm going to Nigeria soon, so we will see who will join.
I've been to Nigeria, Aida. I've been there, No,
I will take you to another place in Nigeria.
I know. You're not going to take me to Calabar.
No, I will not take you to Lagos. No. There is another area where it's not it's not the area where you go.
Yes, the
But
nice
like
areas.
really,
Thank
it's an
you.
invitation for mission trips.
Thank
Like
you, Aida.
mission change our lives. So it's another
Amen to
invitation
that.
for people to join.
And I
Thank
will say,
you
I mean,
all.
thanks, for the kind words. But like I said, it is such a privilege to get to do
Yeah.
this. Like I tell people I have the best job in the world. As hard as it is, as tiring and all these other things, like yeah, to get to be able to see those
Yeah.
heroes and work alongside them. There's nothing better, I gotta say.
Yes, I
So,
agree. I fully
Amen to that.
agree. I fully agree.
God bless
We
you.
are
God
the
give us all the
privileged people.
opportunity to experience that and taste the beauty of service like you guys have. Thank you
Mhm.
so much.
Thank you.
To our audience, we love
Thanks,
you.
guys.
Thank you for always being great supporters of our channel and our podcast. And we leave you in the grace and blessing of God. Until next time, we say peace and good night.
Good
Good night,
night.
guys.
Bye. Bye.